Well, here we are with yet another case, with yet another false confession once again. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Daniel Gristwood. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, of course, hello, my name is Mike. If you are new to the channel, I tell multiple true crime stories every single week here on YouTube, so please subscribe if you're into that kind of thing. I got a whole bunch of videos on here, like hundreds and hundreds of them for you to look through. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. I have 2 different pages, and you can follow those pages by going to the link tree in the description of this video below, or the links to my TikToks will pop up here at some point in the beginning and also at the end. Also in that link tree below, you will find my merch store. We sell t-shirts and hoodies and stuff like that, and we ship all over this wonderful octagonal shaped earth. That was just a big miss. Oh my god, I just realized once again I had the little cell phone holder blocking the view. This time I noticed it, so now it won't be in there the rest of the time. Sorry about that. Anyway, check out the merch store if you want to. And then lastly, if there is a case you want me to cover, just send me a really quick email to my email address, which is also listed below. Just email me the name of the individual or the case, where it happened, and when it happened. I'll add it to the list. There's over 6,000 names on that list. It may take me a long time to get to that one because I pick my cases at random, so I just can't promise you when I'll get to that one, but I will at some point. But at any rate, let's get into today's case. This particular case happened in the Clay, New York area in 1996. Daniel and Christina Gristwood were a seemingly happily married couple, and they had 5 children together. Daniel Gristwood worked as a machine worker or a machine repairman of some kind. And from what I can tell, there didn't appear to be any issues, at least nothing extreme, like in their marriage or anything like that. Like there weren't any extramarital affairs going on or anything that would lead to anything that may suggest that one of them would cause harm to the other one. It was the night of January 12th, 1996. Daniel Gristwood had worked that day, and then afterwards he went to go hang out with some friends. He got off work at 11:45 p.m., and then almost immediately afterwards he met the friends to go have some beers and just kind of hang out, and he left the bar to go back to his home sometime just before 3 o'clock in the morning. Daniel arrives home a few minutes after 3 a.m. When he gets in, the kids are asleep in bed. Everything seems okay, but then he walks into the bedroom he shares with his wife, and he sees his 26-year-old wife on the bed just covered in blood, and there is blood everywhere. She appears to have been viciously attacked, and it appeared to have been done by a hammer. 911 was called, and the ambulance arrives, and they're able to bring her to the hospital. They do determine that her head essentially had been bashed in with a hammer, and she had several blows to her head. The hammer itself was found at the crime scene. Christina was essentially in a coma for some time, but just to get this kind of out of the way now, I will tell you that Christina Gristwood actually survives this attack, and this is not a murder case. The same night that Christina is taken into the hospital after this attack, her husband, Daniel Gristwood, is brought into the police station for questioning. He gives them his detailed account of what he did that night. He said he was at the bar until just before 3 o'clock in the morning, and he got home literally a few minutes after 3 when he called the police. Daniel had no blood anywhere, not a single drop of blood on his clothes, his shoes, anywhere on his skin. And this was a very bloody crime scene. I mean, there was, if you can imagine, like just being bludgeoned in the head with a hammer, there was blood spatter all over the place. It would have been impossible for the person wielding the hammer to not get blood on themselves. Police also did not find any traces of blood in any of the sinks, the shower, the baths. There wasn't any blood in the drains that would indicate someone had cleaned themselves up at this crime scene anywhere. But the same night this all happened, they brought him in for questioning, the husband, and they were also questioning neighbors just in the neighborhood at the time. And one person said that sometime between 10:30 p.m. and 11:30 p.m., this neighbor saw Daniel Gristwood's car parked just outside of the Gristwood residence. But that doesn't make any sense because Daniel Gristwood was at work until 11:45 p.m. They brought him in and grilled him for 16 consecutive hours. They did not let him sleep for 34 hours. He denied at first. He completely denied having anything to do with this. He said, I was at work. You can prove that I was at work, which you could. You can ask my friends. I was at the bar with them until just before 3 o'clock. They did confirm that. Daniel calls police really just not too soon after 3 o'clock in the morning, within minutes of him getting home. How on earth would he have been seen at the bar just before 3 and then within a 15, 20-minute window of time drove home, bashed his wife's head in with a hammer, called 911 and all that? How would he have enough time to do all of that? But they just essentially kept telling him, well, we think you did this. But they also said to him, if you don't admit you did this, if you don't tell us the truth, not only is your wife no longer going to be in your life, but we're taking all of your kids away from you too. They kept doing this whole threatening him with... So interrogators are allowed to lie with regards to what evidence they have. Something they're really not allowed to lie about, they're not allowed to lie in the form of a threat. And that technically saying that we're going to take your kids away from you is perceived as a threat. They're telling him, you're going to go away for the rest of your life for this if you don't tell us what you did. And so after 34 hours of no sleep, being grilled for 16 hours in an interrogation room, after hours of denying he had anything to do with it, telling them, you can check this, you can check this, check my alibi, check my work, everything, he finally ends up caving in and he signs a statement saying he was the one to hit his wife over the head with a hammer. He said, quote, I am very sorry that I did this to my wife because I love her more than anything in the world, end quote. So Daniel Gristwood ends up he's arrested and charged with the attempted murder of his wife, who is still basically in a coma with brain damage. He ends up going to trial, and unbelievably, despite there not being a single piece of physical evidence connecting him to this attack, and that also means no fingerprints on the hammer, anything like that, to put that hammer in his hand. They had no evidence to put him in the apartment during the physical, actual murder. The kids were asleep, and they were still asleep when he got home. No one witnessed it, no one saw it, no one heard anything. Despite all of it, despite the fact that he had a pretty airtight alibi, especially since the one witness said, well, I saw his car, but during a time when he was at work. But because he confessed after 16 hours of being questioned by police, he was found guilty of the attempted murder of his wife, Christina. During the trial was one big thing that changed, and that was the testimony of the neighbor who stated that they saw the car. And even despite this change, he was still convicted. But the change was, she said she actually saw the car sometime between midnight and 8 a.m. because she had been backing out of her spot to go drive someone to pick someone up. So no longer is her statement that she saw the car before 11:30 p.m., just after midnight, or sometime before 8 a.m. That's a humongous window of time, especially considering part of that time is nighttime, the other part is daytime, but she changed that that's a big window of time she changed it to. But even with that change, again, he was found guilty of the attempted murder, and he was sentenced to 12 and a half to 25 years in prison. Christina Gristwood does eventually come to, and I'm having a hard time finding what her account is, but I don't see anywhere where she says either it was him or wasn't him. I want to say that obviously it was probably dark and it happened suddenly in a dark bedroom, and so she probably either didn't witness it or she has such severe head trauma that she doesn't remember it. And it sounds like her and her family believe that he did this, and she would end up divorcing him at some point around the trial. 2 months after the hammer attack of Christina Gristwood. A woman in Syracuse was attacked in her apartment, and she was attacked by holy shit. That is a face. Jump scare alert, sorry. She was attacked by this guy, 24-year-old Masto Davis. He had beat this woman in her apartment, choked her, and threatened to murder her. And then he robbed the apartment. He would end up pleading guilty to attempted robbery, amongst other things, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was released in 2002, and shortly after his release, he was then accused of attacking yet another woman, this time in the laundry room in the basement level of an apartment building. And he did so while he was completely nude. When he was in jail for that case, he told the sheriff's deputies that he wanted to confess to another crime. He says he wanted to confess to the murder of Christina Gristwood. He didn't know that Christina Gristwood didn't die. He would actually go to a judge with this, and the judge says, we'll talk to your lawyers and then see what happens. But then nothing happens. Despite him saying, I want to confess to attacking her, nothing occurs. By 2003, he's, I guess, not in jail at this point. He goes into the Syracuse Police Department again and says, I need to confess to the attempted murder of Christina Gristwood. This time, they actually let him sit down and they let him talk. And they write out the 6-page statement about the attack. He said that he had walked accidentally into the Gristwood apartment because he thought it was the apartment he was supposed to be staying in that night. He gave an incredibly detailed description of the Gristwood apartment. He also saw the 5 children sleeping in the apartment, and he knew where they were all sleeping. He tells them he saw a fruit basket with a hammer on top of it, and he grabs the hammer. He said the fruit basket was right next to the microwave. The investigators would go back and look at the crime scene video they took of walking through the crime scene. And as a matter of fact, there was a fruit basket right next to the microwave, something that was never detailed anywhere. He also tells them that he stepped on a cat in the apartment. Another detail that was never said publicly to anyone and was never relevant to any story that was told about this was that the kids had actually took in a stray cat that same day. They didn't own a cat, but that particular day they took in a stray cat that was in their apartment that night. Nobody knew that. No one did. So they can now say with certainty, because of how vivid his description of the Gristwood apartment was, of the position of all the children, the position of where Christina Gristwood was in bed, the position of the fruit basket next to the microwave, the hammer, the cat, they knew for a fact that he was in the apartment that night. They knew it. They didn't have, I think, physical evidence to place him there. Like, there wasn't any, fingerprints. And it actually took 2 years for Daniel Gristwood's attorneys to kind of continue collecting evidence and witness statements and testimonies and all that from different people to finally present this to the prosecution and to the courts. And in August of 2005, a judge vacated Daniel Gristwood's conviction altogether. The judge said that there was, quote, unassailable corroboration in the confession that Mr. Davis gave. Not to mention the fact that this fit the pattern of attacks he had done previous, of attacks that he had been convicted of. And so in August of 2005, after the judge says this, the conviction is completely vacated. And by July of 2006, so he was released from prison in 2005, Daniel Gristwood. And by July of 2006, all of the charges altogether were completely dropped. Unfortunately, there is a statute of limitations on this type of crime in New York, meaning that it had been past that statute of limitations when this Malto Davis person confessed to the attack of on Christina Gristwood, which means he was never going to be tried for it. So there was never going to be an arrest made in this particular case, no trial or anything. However, he had been in Florida at some point around this time, and he had beat and raped a 75-year-old woman in Florida. And he was sentenced and convicted of that crime and sentenced to life in prison in Florida. So he will never be able to attack anyone ever again. In May of 2013, the state of New York ordered that Daniel Gristwood be paid roughly $5.5 million for being wrongfully convicted of a crime for 9 years of a crime he did not commit. In 2014, in April, Christina Gristwood would eventually pass away. I know she was living in the care of an aide, and she had permanent brain damage. And I read one article that Christina Gristwood's family still maintains that Daniel was responsible for this attack. I get even with Mr. Davis's confession. And that's why I hate these situations so much, is because despite him being completely exonerated of this crime, despite there being a confession, and this is a believed confession. I mean, this guy described the apartment and everything in it and the cat and everything with such detail that nobody else should have known that. Nobody. And so it's more than enough proof that he did this Davis guy. Daniel Gristwood did not do this. Not only was he at work, he then was seen at a bar until 3 o'clock in the morning. There's no way he could have done it. And yet, you have stories like his and others where despite an exoneration, despite saying he is innocent, despite all of it, despite someone else going to prison for this crime or any other crime in this kind of story, you still have the legal court system, and then you have the court of public opinion. The court of public opinion sometimes tends to be worse than the legal court system. That people like Daniel Gristwood, and there are so many people out there just like him in this situation, they're still considered guilty in the public's eye, despite all the evidence on the contrary at this point. That they're still viewed as either a murderer or an attempted murderer or a rapist or whatever the case may be. It's so annoying that that's kind of how people think. Like, well, you were convicted of the crime. You did confess to it. So obviously this other guy confessed to it. Well, I still think you did it. Like, we have got to be more open-minded. Like, it's insane to me that people are capable of still thinking this way of, I don't care if they were exonerated, I don't care if there was proof, there was evidence that they didn't do it, this other guy, confessed to doing it and it's undeniable, I don't care, I still think the person that's now exonerated, I still think they did it. Like, just drop your ego for a second and you spent a long portion of your life hating this particular person because you thought they did the thing they were convicted of doing, but now you know they're not. You have proof that they're not, and so just I know it's sometimes hard to separate that, but you have to. It's not fair to the person because now they're a victim. And in this case, Daniel Gristwood is a victim. He spent 9 years in a jail cell for something he didn't do. He lost the rest of his life because in 2015, I believe, just shortly after he was awarded this, several $1 million, he died of lung cancer. So in a sense, Daniel Gristwood's life really ended on January 12th, 1996, the night he was basically told that he was an attempted killer. And that sucks. I just think we as a society, as the court of public opinion, I just feel like there's so much more room for improvement in the way we think about things like this. And in the end, not only did Daniel Gristwood lose the rest of his life, but so did Christina Gristwood. I mean, if you really think about it, she lived, thankfully, but she wasn't the same person. She had severe brain damage. She needed to be cared for basically all the time. And her life essentially ended that night too. And really, their 5 children lost both of their parents that night. And then to make it even worse, Christina Gristwood didn't get justice. She was savagely beaten with a hammer inside of her bedroom while she slept. And in the end, she did not get justice, and she never will, because the guy will never be charged for this. I mean, sure, he's in a prison cell, so in a sense, she kind of got justice, but not direct justice. So sadly, in the end, Daniel, and especially Christina, did not get any justice. Not the justice that any of them rightfully deserved.